Kia ora tātou for a start. My name's Mike Kelly from 2Shakes, and this Do You Have Trust Issues webinar is part of a coffee webinar series. So hopefully you've all got your coffee mugs with you, your 2Shakes coffee mugs. If not, just give us a shout and we'll try and get one to you. The idea of these is really about in 2Shakes, we learn a lot of stuff that's going on. We get a lot of questions about things. And every now and then we like to grip it all up and do a bit of a webinar. We've previously done ones on biometric ID or on PEP checks and various others as well. So all of that stuff will end up on our website under webinars, and you can go there, have a look. This one will be up in a few days' time. We'll record this as well. And it's just a way of helping our customers or people who are in the industry who have got a bit of an issue in some area, just to help them understand the area a little bit better and help them out with their due diligence. So let's just get started anyway. So this one's about trust issues. What we're going to cover is what trusts are and why you would have one, what enhanced due diligence, SOW and POF, you'll see that a lot, source of wealth, proof of funds means, the type of trusts that you'll encounter, and the different roles that you might need to look for ID verification. The typical steps to perform enhanced due diligence on a trust, and I'll be taking you through what 2Shakes does and how it helps there and how you would deal with it. And then some checks that a compliance officer, the AML compliance officer, would look at the end, some further resources, and then we'll get to Q&A. So that's really what we're going to cover. There's a little bit before we begin, and it's just to remind people we're doing this to try and help by sharing information that we found out along the way. But remember, it's an opinion. I don't want to be sued by anyone as that was legal advice you gave us and it turned out blah, blah, blah. So whenever you're doing anything, just remember that you can refer to the legislation. There's information and advice that your AML supervisor, and a lot of you that will be DIA, will provide. And you'll have an AML program and your own compliance officer, unless you are the compliance officer. And remember that the DIA email address for help, that's just amlcft@dia.govt.nz. We give the email address out a lot in order for people to contact DIA if they need to, and just be absolutely sure of their specific unique situation, because one thing in AML, every situation is different. Okay, so it's just a little reminder. So what are trusts? So really briefly, trusts, they actually date back to the Middle Ages, when knights would be going off crusading or off on a battle somewhere, and they wanted to make sure if they didn't come back or while they're away that the castle and keep was still safe for their wife and kids, because only the knight was allowed to own property. So the idea, if they got killed and there was no other person there, that somebody else would take the castle and the wife and kids would be out. So they created this idea of a trust that could own the assets, the castle. And so if the knight didn't come back, then his wife and kids were looked after and they could still continue to benefit from the castle, but the trust would own it. And that's really where it started. And through time, that's kind of come into various reasons why people would want to set up a trust. And, it's why we've got a kind of proliferation of trusts now. Now, some people want to do it for legacy and privacy, and there's an elderly couple here, Don and Jan. You can imagine they've got their family home, it's all paid for. They want to, they want to put it in a trust so that the trust can look after it, manage it, maintain it for the benefit of their children without all the children sort of squabbling over it in the end, or them having to sell it and divide it up. So that's one area. Protection. You imagine an entrepreneur who is doing a bit of work and they know that should they get sued, it might not just be their company gets sued, but they might get sued personally if something goes wrong. So they don't want to own their family home or any other assets themselves in case they lost them in a lawsuit. So they can put them into the ownership of a trust, and the trust can then manage them, and that person can still benefit with them, but with having the protection of not losing it, because legally they don't own that property anymore. And then there's like succession, or if you think of a charity, you get charitable trusts that get set up for a charitable purpose. But then, and then the people who, when they're leaving that charity or when they leave, the charity needs to still be managed. It needs to have rules around it. And so a charitable trust allows people to establish something, to found something with charitable intent, but that has got longevity after they no longer are involved. So that's just some of the reasons. There's heaps of other reasons why people would want trusts, but that's really, it just gives you an idea of why you would have a trust. And they are very common. So nobody knows exactly how many. Ministry of Justice estimates 300,000 to 500,000 trusts in New Zealand alone, compared to 677 at the last count, 1,000 registered companies. Interestingly, we can see with the companies register, there's registered companies, but with the trusts, there is no trust register. There is no exact format for what a trust looks like. There is as many trusts out there as people start writing up and sign off, and they've created a trust. So they don't have to be registered. We don't know exactly how many, but there's a lot. So there's a really good chance that you're going to be encountering them. Now, there was some recent legislation and some changes at IRD as well in terms of compliance for trusts. And a lot of people are talking about the numbers of them likely to decline. But given where they're starting from, chances are over the next few years, you're still going to be signing up trusts, you're still going to be dealing with trusts, and you need to know how to do your due diligence on them. So trusts do have a lot of legitimate reasons that we talked about, but fundamentally, they do help hide the identity of people who have put assets into the trust. Because the ownership of those assets, without the trust deed, it's hard to see who actually put them in there and who's benefiting from them. Without that register of trust deeds, there's a great deal of anonymity involved in that system. For that reason, they are very popular with the criminal fraternity who want to benefit from assets and ill-gotten gains without people knowing it's them and not being able to seize them. Because of that reason, the Financial Action Task Force, that's the global body that drives AML legislation around the world, sort of identified trusts as being requiring more than just your normal due diligence. We need to dig a little bit more into it to find out that it's there legitimately and that it's not doing anything nefarious. So for that reason, trusts in New Zealand legislation, there's some extra due diligence that you need to do. One is it triggers enhanced due diligence. So enhanced due diligence, we will talk about it in a minute, but you have to get the source of wealth or the proof of funds so you know where the assets came from. That's the same for any enhanced due diligence. There's other reasons that might happen, but trusts trigger enhanced due diligence. That's the first thing you should be aware of. And the other part of it is just some additional work you need to do for your trusts. So enhanced due diligence is the first kind of trigger. Any trust that's your customer, you need to get source of wealth. Now that source of wealth or proof of funds, that could look like a whole bunch of things, and it's always going to be unique to the situation. Carl Elliott, the entrepreneur, it might be his financial accounts that his accountant can provide you that shows where the money is coming from that's going into the trust. Don and Jan, there might be a sale and purchase agreement for that house. For Peter and his charitable trust, there could be a whole bunch of donation receipts of money that has been put in. Obviously, for Mr. Capone, there's going to be some strange what's going on here with the money, and that's really what we're trying to find. Could Al prove where that money came from? And if not, then we really shouldn't be engaging in a business relationship with them. So source of funds, proof of wealth, that's the first extra part you need to do because it's enhanced due diligence. There is additional information you need to go through. And this is sometimes where things kind of break down a little bit and it gets very difficult. So, and it's a big part of the reason for this, this webinar. So I'm going to just dwell on this slide just for a little bit. So with trusts, there are different types of trusts. When you get a trust, you can have a look at the trust deed and start looking through it. And reading the trust deed is pretty much the best way of finding this information out. And it's almost the only way, but you can start off reading the trust and you will find that a trust will be classed as a fixed trust if you get to the beneficiaries section, and the beneficiaries have got fixed interest or fixed proportions for any disbursements from the trust. And you also see that the trustees themselves, there won't be any any clauses that say that the trustees have complete discretion over who gets paid how much and when. So there'll be no wording around discretionary powers for the trustees, nothing at their sole discretion, anything like that. So if it's like that, it's classed as a fixed trust. And you have to capture that information, and I'll show you how to do that later. And if it's a fixed trust, there's some information that you need to capture for that type of trust too. Now, a discretionary trust, and this really is the majority of cases, if it's a family trust, they're very often discretionary, not always. You still have to read them. But with the discretionary trust, the deed allows the trustees complete discretion to manage the trust and make payments as they see fit or at their sole discretion. So when you're reading the trust deed and you're looking at the powers of the trustees, it will talk about having in their sole discretion, or they have complete discretionary powers. If that's the case, it's a discretionary trust, and the information you have to capture about that and who you need to ID verify is going to be different. And the last section is on a charitable trust. Now, with a charitable trust, most charitable trusts will be registered at the charities office. Not all of them are. So you'll still need to get the trust deed from your client if it's not registered at the charities office. And the deed will outline various things about who's running it, who the trustees are, and the purpose of it. With a charitable trust, there are certain people you need to ID verify and additional information that you need to capture about the charity. And we can go into that later on. So, who do you need to ID verify? And this is kind of that gets to the crux of it. So you're looking for the beneficial owners of the trust that you're dealing with. And beneficial owners sometimes can be a simple idea, and sometimes it can get a little bit gnarly, especially with trusts. Let's take the settlor for a start. So they're the person who owned some assets and they've established the trust. They're the trust's benefactor. And there might be more than one. Now, in most cases, the settlor is likely to end up as one of the trustees, and they're going to be a beneficial owner of the trust. In some cases, they are going to have left the trust, put the assets in, left, nothing to do with it anymore. And there might be a case for not ID verifying them in that situation, but I've heard different opinions on that. So we always tend to go with, if you can ID verify the settlor, it's a good idea. So we say that they should be ID verified unless it's an exceptional situation. Then there's individual trustees. Now, often these will be people who were the settlor and they've become trustees, or people who have come on subsequently. They're managing the assets on behalf of the trust. And so they'll be named either in the original deed or in a later variation that appoints them. The trustees are in control. They are controlling the assets. They are beneficial owners of the trust. So any trustees need to be ID verified. A corporate trustee, now often there's an independent trustee, and that independent trustee will actually, rather than be a person, will be a company, and it kind of opens a can of worms. So with beneficial owners, you're trying to find the natural persons who own or are in control or benefit from the trust with certain thresholds. So a corporate trustee it's just like, we're talking about a company. So somebody runs a company that does trustee services. It's what they provide. You pay for them to be a trustee on your trust to make sure everything is being done above board and you following the rules. Now, a corporate trustee, effectively, is doing CDD on that company. So you're trying to find out the beneficial owners of the company, who is the corporate trustee, and ID verifying them. Now, if that's just one or two people, that might be easy. If it's a company with 50 or 100 different people who could act on behalf of the trust, it gets really gnarly. And there's a really good chance you might have to look at, instead of doing the ID verification on all of them, you might have to do some exceptions. So, and you can do that within your program. You should have an exception handling, and you can try and nail it down to a few people who are going to act for the trust. Suffice to say, if it's a corporate trustee, that just means it's a company, and you have to look inside the company and see who owns and controls and benefits from it. And then there's the beneficiaries themselves. So the beneficiaries in some way or shape will be listed in the trust document. Now, for a fixed trust, and this is where it gets a little bit interesting, for a fixed trust, if a single beneficiary has more than 25% of the benefit of that trust, so their proportion of disbursements, whenever they happen, it will be in fixed proportion, and they're getting more than 25%, that's above the beneficial ownership threshold. And so they would need to be added to people for ID verification. So that's on a fixed trust. Otherwise, there's information you need to get, but they won't necessarily for discretionary trusts, the beneficiaries, or charitable trusts, the beneficiaries won't normally need to be ID verified. But just remember, if it's a fixed trust and one of the beneficiaries or more has more than 25% of the fixed beneficial ownership of the trust, they meet the threshold in the legislation as a beneficial owner and they need to be ID verified. So there's a little bit here about when a trust owns a company, and it's quite interesting, and often you'll find this. So when a trust owns a company and the company is becoming your client, you're signing up the company, you find that 98%, say, of the shares are owned by a trust, or over 25% of the shares are owned by a trust, you need to do due diligence on the trust. So you still need to get the trust name and address. You have to look through the trust deed for the settlors, for the trustees, work out the kind of trust, put in the beneficiaries, add the people for ID verification. So you have to do due diligence on the trust as per the normal trust as a client situation. The only difference is if the trust owns the company that's your client, it doesn't in itself make it enhanced due diligence. Obviously, if there are other factors that might trigger enhanced due diligence, and you might still need to do it for that. For instance, the company that you're dealing with might be a high cash business and you've got a red flag in your program for that. It's high risk and you still need to do enhanced due diligence, but you don't necessarily need to do it on the trust when the trust owns your customer. Right, now I'm just going to go through and show you what that looks like in 2Shakes so that we can just take a trust and do due diligence on it. So in this case, we're just going to say that the trust is the Beale Family Trust. We're dealing with a lady called Sue Beale, and she's given us her address, but just now that's kind of all we know. Now I've had a little tip here that says, as soon as you know your client's a trust, you know that you're going to need the trust deed to have a look through it and find out all that information. And you also know that you're going to need source of wealth or proof of funds. So as soon as they tell you that they've got a trust that you're signing up, it's a good idea to ask them for that because they might have to go and locate some of that information. It's not necessarily something they'll have straight off the bat. This is 2Shakes, and hopefully most of you are going to be familiar with that. So we're just going to do a start. Now we're going to do an AML only. If it was sign up with AML, the AML part is the same. It's not a company, so we can't search for it. So we're going to go in and add the client details manually. Now we're going to put in Sue Beale as the main contact. So we'll put Sue in. And Sue is not an individual customer, it's just a trust. So we'll take that. And then we got to add the trust as an organization. As I said, this is the Beale Family Trust. Now, I'm in the test environment here. So we're just about to start searching for their address. And we're going to have a little address picker here. This is currently in our test environment. It's coming to the production environment very soon. So we have the address, and then we're going to proceed. And we've got people for ID verification. We know Sue because she's the one that's instructing us. We've got the Beale Family Trust there. And we haven't told 2Shakes it's a trust. The CDD level is standard. We haven't filled anything in yet. So that's just getting initially in there to tell 2Shakes we've got a client that's an organization called the Beale Family Trust. So next, Sue has given us the trust deed. So we're going to look through the trust deed. And we just verify, yep, the full name of the trust. We've got the address of the trust. That's normally on the front page. We can see now, reading the trust deed from the front page again, that Sue and her husband, Dave, are the settlors. They are also the trustees. And there's an additional, and it's a discretionary trust. There's an additional trustee called Pete Jones. He's an independent person. We know it's a discretionary trust because we were having a look through the trust, we read through it, and we found a few places where it talks about at the sole discretion of the trustees and the trustees having complete discretionary powers. We also found a section that talks about the beneficiaries. So section 1.4, when we've been looking through, that describes the beneficiaries as Sue and Dave's children, the children of their children, and so on. And it's just a general kind of class of these are the types of people who are allowed to benefit from this trust. So there's a lot of info that we would be pulling from the trust deed, but this is what you need to do. And this is why you need the trust each time you're taking on a trust, because unlike a company, every trust is different. The way that they write the trust deed, how it's been written, the things that it can do, it's pretty much always different. So you need to look through that trust deed, look for the settlors, look for the trustees, find out the type it is, find out beneficiary description, and just make sure that the name and address are correct. So we have a trust tab in 2Shakes, and in there, we're going to just confirm the name and address. We're going to tell 2Shakes it's a discretionary trust, and we're going to fill in the beneficiaries. So let's have a look at that now. So in here, we'll go down to the customer due diligence level, and you can see along in 2Shakes here, there's all of these high enhanced factors. One of them is trust. So we're going to tick that it's a trust. Now we get warned it's a trust, so you'll need to do enhanced due diligence as well as filling out the additional information on the trust tab. So those are the two extra bits that we need to do, and 2Shakes automatically changes the CDD level to enhanced. You now have a little checkbox to say that you've found the source of wealth or proof of funds and you've recorded it in 2Shakes. And when you do, you can tick that box. But we'll go to the trust tab. Because we've told it it's a trust, we've got the Beale Family Trust and the address. Now, depending on the type of trust you select, you'll get different information coming into the beneficiary description. So if it's a fixed trust, you can put in the name and address and date of birth. If it's a fixed trust with more than 10 beneficiaries, it's the class. A charitable trust needs the type and objects. So in each case, you can choose what it is. In this case, it's a discretionary trust. And I'm just going to make a note because I'm going to use notes and files to attach that trust deed. See section 4 of the attached trust deed. And in there, 1.4 shows the beneficiary description. So those are the additional information, the additional information I need to do in 2Shakes. And then I would upload, just add a note, put in, this is my trust deed. And then I would click choose file and upload it. I don't need to do that just now. I just want to show you what it looks like. So that gets the additional information on the trust done. So it's a start to our due diligence. Now we need to work out the people for ID verification. So here, because it's a discretionary trust, we always need to do the settlors. We always need, we always need to do the settlors except in certain circumstances. And that's kind of the thing with trusts. There's always caveats. Everything's always different. So we mostly need to do the settlors. In this case, we do. They're also the trustees, so that's fine. And we also need to do Pete Jones as a trustee. It was a discretionary trust, so there's none of the beneficiaries need to be added for ID. Again, if it was a fixed trust and any of them had more than 25%, we would need to add them as well. And I'll show you how to do that in the people for IDV section of 2Shakes. So here you're just saying, who do we need to ID verify? We've got Sue in there already. She's the main contact. She's also the settlor, and she's also a trustee, which is great. So we've got the reason we're doing. So now we want to add additional people. So we've got an add more button there. We've also just added the add a person for IDV under trust, because you'll often be wanting to do it directly when you're in there. So I've started typing Dave there. So we've got Dave Beale, and he's a settlor and trustee as well. So we'll put in Dave is settlor and trustee. And we'll just get him added. It's as simple as that to add a person for ID verification. We'll worry about how we ID them afterwards, but we're just putting in, you know, obviously we've got the independent trustee. So Pete Jones, he's not a settlor, but he's still a trustee. So we need to ID verify him. So we're just putting them in and saying, that's what we need to do for the people for ID verification. We can just add people as much as we like on that. So we've got our people added, we've done our trust tab, so we've got some additional information, but we've still got that extra bit, that source of wealth that's triggered by enhanced due diligence. So we've been speaking to Sue, and Sue has provided us, in this case, the trust, the main asset is the family house, and she's provided the sale and purchase agreement of the house that they've transferred into it. So that in this case is, you know, in my opinion, as I'm taking them on as a customer, that seems a pretty legitimate reason or legitimate proof of the wealth or the source of the funds. So I'm going to accept that sale and purchase agreement. Again, like we talked about earlier, and every situation is unique. So what constitutes source of wealth or proof of funds, and you know, for your customer's trust might be different to somebody else's. There's lots of different options that you can get. It's really just seeing that there was a legitimate source that the money or the assets came from. So let's add source of wealth, proof of funds into 2Shakes and tell 2Shakes that we've got it recorded. So again, we're still in the AML Customer Due Diligence page. We've got this notes and files. We've added the trust deed. We'll add in sale and purchase agreement as the source of wealth. So we'll get that added in. Again, you would just click choose file and upload it, and that's all fine. Don't worry about my capital G on there. Choose file, add it in, and we can close that. And we've got source of wealth uploaded to 2Shakes. Then we can come down and we have this little reminder, you know, there's at least one enhanced due diligence that we haven't ticked it for. So we tick to tell 2Shakes, we've now got the source of wealth proof of funds. And at that point, I know that, you know, I've done source of wealth proof of funds for that client. If I had other clients over in that customer area who also were enhanced, there would be boxes for them too. So then, as normal, same as any of your other due diligence, you're going to record nature and purpose of the business relationship. You're going to fill out your risk assessment. And I've just got a little note there. Trusts are always going to be enhanced, but you still need to do a risk assessment to consider other risk factors. You know, just because it's enhanced and you know it's enhanced from the start doesn't mean you don't have to do a risk assessment. You still have to do your normal risk assessment and record that, because there could be other enhanced factors that you need to capture, like high risk, for instance, or nominee shareholders, etc. So let's go back into 2Shakes and we'll just fill out that nature and purpose of the relationship. We've got the two other tabs that we've not touched yet: nature and purpose of relationship and risk assessment. So nature and purpose, there's lots of different things in here, but we've got a little help that gives you a bit of an idea of what you should be putting in there. I know this isn't the purpose of the trusts webinar, but it just gives you a reminder of that information is there to help you. Whatever your nature and purpose of the business relationship in, put it there. It's a little bit like getting a snapshot of what the customer looks like. So in the future, you can see if there's been a material change. You can always keep it, your ongoing due diligence, you can refer back to this information and make sure over time your customer still looks like they did and still is you're doing the same services for them. Otherwise, you might have to consider redoing your due diligence. So I'll put in my risk assessment, I'll just put in some basic notes and I will save updates. And at that, we've now done our customer due diligence. We've got the Beale Family Trust in there. We've got our trust tab filled in. We've captured the people for ID verification. We've uploaded the source of funds. We've uploaded the trust deed. I've filled in my nature and purpose and my risk assessment information. So I'm looking quite good from that point of view. A little bit now, you know, we're just going to get into, I won't go through the whole thing, but at that point, all we need to do, the same as any other due diligence that you do, is for the people for ID verification, verify their identity, verify their address, carry out a PEP check. And there is actually, we've done a webinar previously on biometric ID verification and one on PEP check. So if you're new to 2Shakes or you haven't seen them yet, definitely worth having a look into that. But we'll just go in very simply. I won't kind of labor the point, but we've done all of this stuff. We've got our trusts all filled in, so I'm quite happy with that. And now I can just hit proceed. That takes me through to the people for ID verification. So this is everyone who I've added as people for IDV. And 2Shakes is now going to ask me, how would you like to ID verify them? And there's some different options there in terms of sending them emails or doing it myself. And I can either do an electronic, a biometric plus electronic, or I can do it manually myself. And when you're going through this in 2Shakes, if you don't happen to know, say, Pete Jones's email address, I could just say decide later so that I can get the emails out to the other guys and get things started and edit that section later on. Here, we'll just say that we're sending them all ID emails. We're going to get them all to do biometric. That's the decide later, as I was saying. So I'll do the IDV. You can do it electronic or manual. That's how you would do it yourself. But we'll send them an email and we'll do it biometric. And then we just hit proceed to IDV, and that sends those emails out, and it takes us through to this management page. And when you go into that management page, you can manage the process through from that point. So those people for IDV, they've now been sent emails. They will complete their IDV, and 2Shakes will automatically update you as that happens and give you little ticks to say it's done. And then it will go into an AML pending status in 2Shakes. And when it's AML pending, that's when the compliance officer can have a look through in 2Shakes, have a look through all of the different things that you've been collecting and recording, just to make sure that your compliance is complete. So you're going to have the trust deed and had a look through that, found out the information. You're going to have completed all of that additional trust information on the trust tab, depending on if it's a discretionary, fixed, or a charitable trust. You'll have ID verified the people that you need to verify. So you'll have worked out from the trust deed, settlors, trustees, any beneficiaries on a fixed trust that might need to be ID verified. You'll have got your proof of funds or source of wealth. You've done your nature and purpose of the business relationship, and you've done your risk assessment. You've verified identity for any of those beneficial owners. You've checked the address. You've done the PEP checks. Any other checks I've just mentioned in your AML program, because lots of people have little extra bits in there that they just need to do. So always remember to check your program. And then at the end of it, you can complete CDD and it's done. So that's how you would do AML customer due diligence on a trust and how you would do it step by step in 2Shakes. We have these links on our website, but there's interesting and very useful information. Obviously, the trust blog series itself is very useful, but in part 3, we've got a link to the DIA fact sheet for trusts, for beneficial owners, and the DIA code of practice. Got a bunch of their frequently asked questions. We do have some information on the charity service and charitable purpose, as well as the trust law reform link from the Ministry of Justice, if anybody is interested in jumping more into that and finding out the changes that are coming up in trusts. Well, thanks everyone for listening. I hope you found that really useful, and I hope to see you next time at our next coffee webinar. Thanks very much, and goodbye for now.